Well, hello, teacher friends of the internet. My name is Christina Whitlock, and I have another teaching demonstration for you today. Today, we are talking about one of Catherine Rollin's Preludes. Now, we all know Catherine Rollin is a national treasure. Catherine writes so beautifully in historical time periods, but yet more accessible for our intermediate students. And her collection of preludes is a great precursor to Chopin for our students who are not quite ready for those preludes, but love the romantic essence that those pieces give us. So the preludes come in 3 books. You can buy each book separately, or you can buy a complete collection. I have volume 3 in my hand right now, but I always recommend buying the complete collection. It's only a couple of dollars more, and you're going to want all 3 books of those preludes, so just get them in one book while you can. And I do the same for my students. So this is a bonus copy, I guess, of level 3 that I have sitting around. And I thought I would talk today about the prelude number 6 from book 3 in B flat minor. Dun, dun, dun. Let's talk about why we love the key of B flat minor. Well, first of all, this is a great piece because we don't find a lot of works in the key of B flat minor. But B flat minor has, do you know how many flats? The answer is 5. We have 5 flats in the key of B flat minor, and that's fantastic because that is all 5 of our black keys. And I like to remind my students that this is a key that actually fits really beautifully under the hand because, first of all, we don't have to worry about any of those pesky white key flats. We just have the 5 black keys. And oftentimes we can use this to our advantage because our longest fingers can go on those black keys, and then our shorter fingers can hang out on the white keys. Now, there are a million exceptions to that, we know, and there's plenty of exceptions to be found in this piece, but I just like to remind my students that sometimes 5 flats is more friendly than 3 flats, because of course in the 3 flats you have to balance what is flat and what is not. And in this case, we just know we're going to use all 5 black keys. Okay, there's my spiel about B flat minor. I find it really important to have students playing in as many different keys as possible. And again, because this is not a key we find very often for intermediate students, I am pretty jazzed about this. Okay, so I love this prelude. I'm going to give you a small taste of the first theme. What you're going to listen for is we have a very legato bass line, and we also have a very clear melody. So let's hear what we've got here. And that's your first theme of this piece. Isn't that beautiful? So, first things first, friends, when you are teaching these pieces, please do not neglect to play them for your students. We have to get our students on board with the emotional connections to this piece, and we can ask them to do that all day long. But what's really going to seal the deal for them is hearing you live and in person play this music with a lot of expression, and to kind of preface their whole exploration of this piece with the musical intent behind it. So often, I know, I've been there, I've been this kind of teacher where we like open up to the new piece of music and maybe we say even, oh, I'll play this for you once you do some sight reading of it, right? Because I know we're all terrified that our students are just going to copy us, and then what kind of readers are they going to be? That is a faulty concern, my friends. We do not have to worry about our students copying us. In fact, if they can play like us just after hearing us play their piece once, great, lucky you and lucky students. Anyway, so as we're playing this, I want my student to understand the intent behind this piece from the get-go. That's going to do a lot to get them engaged and committed to the piece before them. We all know it's not going to be fun to sit down and sight read in a mildly awkward key and just play. Even if it goes that well, it's not going to be very engaging for the student. It's not going to build a sense of excitement to learn this piece. But if they hear you play with those beautiful long lines, you have a much better shot. And by the way, I just remind you that if you want your students to learn how to play beautifully and with expression, then we cannot expect them just to encounter these things in the outside world. We need to be the ones that are introducing them to these kinds of phrase shapes and these kinds of sounds. If we don't do it, who else is going to, right? Okay, it doesn't have to be something you add in extra at the end. We can just play beautifully from the get-go. Okay, so how are we going to get our students started playing this piece? They've heard it, they have an idea of what the musical idea is, and so now what are we going to do? Well, first of all, your students are going to spend a lot of time laying the path of the key, because again, that's going to be seen as the major hurdle here, right? So your students can start by spending a lot of time in D flat major, and then they can move to playing some scales in B flat minor. I think familiarizing ourselves with our scales and our arpeggios and our chord progressions and improvisations and all of these things in the key of B flat minor are a really good idea. And then as we look at it, hopefully that has built the path of the scale and the key for your students. So then we notice that in this left hand, we have this eighth note rocking pattern, right, where the bottom notes, counts 1, 2, 3, and 4, are serving double duty as quarter notes and eighth notes, right? So in other words, we have really a counter melody happening in your bottom voice, right? So we have this da 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 da, right? And then we move to E flat, and it's the same thing, right? So we want our students to notice that kind of right off the bat so that they don't get lost in this sea of notes of boo doo 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 doo. We've all been there, heard that, right? So here's the idea. I'm gonna let my students just work that lower voice first, right? Maybe we block it, but I don't think that blocking it is a really great way to solidify the legato that we're going to need out of that bottom voice. So I may not do that right now. So we're gonna get really good at that. We're gonna add the right hand melody on top, right? So that we have right? And I would challenge my students to learn how to play that as beautifully as they possibly can. Because as we all know, from there, it's just a matter of lightly adding the thumb, right, to that top voice. And eventually, then we're set. Right? And that will be a great stepping stone for them. Okay, so that takes care of like the whole first page. We're really building that counter melody in the left hand. We are working on phrase shaping in the right hand, listening to the decay of our notes. This is where this really becomes important. And we all know in Chopin preludes how important it is to listen through our long notes and then match the next pitch, right? So for instance, in this melody of we don't want and it's really easy to do. It's very simple to have right. We don't want that. We want to have right, and then a long note, and then here we are again. Good. There's a retard here that your students can really play with. Anyway, that's the idea of the A theme. When we get to the second theme on the next page, we get more lengthy arpeggios. So we're dealing with things like, and of course, my sticking point on arpeggiated patterns is that we don't want a lot of like loop-de-loop. We don't want the wrist doing too much, right? The idea of an arpeggio is that we want the forearm to essentially stay level with the floor, right? And we just want to use the arm to take us from point A to point B. And that means that when it's time, for instance, in this 5, 2, 1, 2, 1, right? In this arpeggio, we want to make sure that there is as little movement as possible from here to here. And most of the work comes from the arm, right? Notice that my wrist is not working too hard, right? And then we'll have and then okay. And of course, with my obsession with endings of phrases and endings of motives, we have to make sure our students are not because of course our thumb is a thunky finger and it likes to jump out if we're not really careful about it. We all know how many millions of pieces in the repertoire our students are going to encounter with arpeggio patterns that look like this. Right? So it's best now if we can condition them that every time they see one of these kinds of patterns that we're always going to take it easy on that top finger that almost always ends up being the thumb, right? So no matter what key we're in, we're going to be really gentle on that last note. Yeah? So that's really important. I think it's very essential that we help our students see that yes, we're learning the prelude in B flat minor right now, but what we're really doing is learning skills to take to other pieces. This is something that we know as teachers. Like we recognize the fact that we're building these skill sets, but I find that we don't always tell our students that that's the goal. Our students tend to get very focused on the piece in front of them. And then when we go to the next piece, it's just kind of like when they take a test in biology, they let all of that old information out and they start over again, right? This is the antithesis of what we want from our students, right? So let's make sure that as we use these arpeggio passages and as we're practicing these ideas and these practice methods in the first theme, that we let our students know, now, in the future, you're going to see this pattern again. You will play this pattern the rest of your days in the piano repertoire. Whatever, just bring your students into that, into that goal mindset, knowing that all of the skills we're working on today, yes, they're an investment in this piece, but they're actually an investment in their entire understanding of how to play the instrument and how to interpret the repertoire. I just don't think we have this conversation with our students enough. Okay, have I, preached on my soapbox adequately? Okay, good. So the gist of the second theme here is really in those left-hand arpeggios. The right-hand melody is fairly straightforward as long as we're listening, as long as we are shaping, as long as we're paying attention to our key. You do get some moments in measure 22 with some C flats. And of course, your students are going to say, why would a composer use C flat? Why don't they just write B? Now, when my students are in the elementary stages, most of the time I say, you're going to see why later. You're going to have to trust me on this. There is a reason. You're going to see it later. Well, guess what? Here's a chance. They are at a point in their musical understanding where it's not going to just completely blow their mind why we use C flat instead of B. And so what I often like to do, if you know anything about me and my teaching, I keep a dry erase staff board within arm's reach almost all the time, except for right now. And so I might sketch out what that bass line would look like using a B natural instead of a C flat. And oftentimes that will clear the question up right away. When we see the alternate side, we recognize it's really messy and it doesn't make sense within the key and the chord that we're outlining, of course. So anyway, I'll play the second theme for you just so you can have an idea of what's here. That takes us back to back to our original theme. So that second theme is beautiful. It's a great melody. It belongs in a movie. We always talk about what films we could imagine this in or what kind of scene this would be in a movie, and students always have fun with that. So there is a coda that kicks in after the second time through the first theme. And it's a very brief coda, but I want to play it for you just so you can see how we wrap this thing up. So it goes like this. Just your standard broken arpeggios, but really beautiful, right? One thing I like to point out to my students, they often get to this final chord and they tell me that doesn't sound finished, right? Well, sure, I have them explore and I say, okay, how could we roll that final chord in a way that sounds finished to your ear? And eventually, after some experimentation, they'll find this, right? So if we end with tonic on the top note and the bottom note, of course, that's going to be a really firm, clear ending, right? This is a great way to talk to your students about voicing and how it matters. And so when Catherine Rollin gives us this, we have the third of the chord kind of hanging out there as almost a musical question mark. It's finished, but is it, does it keep the air of mystery floating through the universe? Yes, it does. And isn't that cool? Isn't that great that we can make our audience think, oh, I wonder if there's more. I think that's so fantastic. Again, goes to that exciting power of audience control that we have over helping our listeners feel something or think something about what we're doing. So I'll let my students play around. We'll put the fifth onto the top of the chord. Do we like that better? Maybe they like that. Maybe they like this. Maybe they like this. It's really a great way to get your students to think in terms of tonality and in terms of chord function, but also experiment. And they get to decide what they like. And then we'll say, but at the end of the day, this is what we're given. So I just think that's a great way to help your students start to think outside the box in terms of harmonic function of their pieces. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this piece. I wanted to say one more thing about it. Don't you think it's interesting? I think we all know that we want to avoid this stereotypical definition for our students of major equals happy and minor equals sad, right? And at the same time, it's hard to come up with examples of pieces that don't fit those categories, right? But here is a great example of a piece that is in B flat minor, and yet it doesn't sound particularly sad or dark or haunted or any of those characteristics that we often characterize with minor pieces. So this to me is so much fun to help students recognize that minor does not always equal sad, that we can have some very beautiful, very uplifting sounds in the key of B flat minor. Thank you so much. Be sure to hit that subscribe button here in this video. Follow me at the Beyond Measure podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts for more. My goal is to post a teaching demo every month. So check back in November. We'll see what I have for you. Thanks a lot, friends. Take care.